Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This morning, a number of us had a meeting with Jack Clark, the co-founder and head of policy at Anthropic, and it was I think enlightening to hear him say how for Anthropic that the investment, the advancements, the deployment of AI had exceeded by about 5 years their expectations of the development and advance of AI, even based on the projections that they made 3 years ago. They said we're 5 years beyond where we thought we would be today. And I just point to the velocity of change here in this sector and what a problem it creates up here in terms of trying to regulate that and protect markets as well as protecting consumers. I know a couple of you have mentioned the sandbox model, and Ms. Turner-Lee, the Singapore model, and we actually had a congressional delegation from this committee go to Singapore and kind of review the model that they had for their sandbox back when they were doing a fintech sandbox and crypto sandbox. So interestingly enough, their sandbox has an ethical framework which begins with a principles-based approach so that there's elements of fairness and accountability, inclusivity, and it sets an ethical foundation for all AI projects. It has a bias mitigation element to their sandbox and mitigates bias in those AI systems. And developers are encouraged to assess their algorithms for potential discrimination. There are data transparency practices that must be complied with. Organizations must be clear about how data is collected, processed, and shared. Explainability requirements within their sandbox model. So they must ensure that their AI systems can provide understandable justifications for their decision-making. And there's also very strong stakeholder engagement, encouraging a wide range of stakeholders and massive user privacy protections that are very important, not only for Singapore, but globally and certainly for the United States as well. And there are regular reviews and audits of that sandbox process among these participants in the sandbox, as well as blueprints and guidelines and knowledge sharing. Is that the formula that we should use if we're going to go? I know the full committee chairman has an idea about sandboxes, and we're going back and forth, he and I, about what that should look like. I'd just like to get your feedback. You've touched on a lot of the sensitive issues, and I'd like to hear you extrapolate a little bit more.
Thank you so much for that question. I mean, I am a fan of sandboxes. I wrote a paper in 2018 when we were just beginning this bubble on what algorithms was going to do when it came to consumers. And regulatory sandboxes are a great way to experiment. In fact, here in the United States, we've used sandboxes to cultivate the fintech marketplace. But because of the velocity of speed in which AI is gathering our personal information, the velocity in which we are going into transformational models where we can't determine the beginning and the end, when we actually deploy a sandbox model in this day and age, it is important to have many of those variables that the Singapore government has put into place. It allows for accountability, continuous monitoring, transparency, and it also allows us to ensure that consumers are baked into the process, as opposed to providing waivers and exceptions to companies to experiment and then come back and tell us how it's all going to work, which is the current model from which we exercise right now when it comes to AI.
Thank you. One problem that I noticed in the Singapore model was the number of participants was limited, so it never scaled up. So some of the problems that we see with AI is when you get that scalability. And is there a way for us to, I know the auditing and review after the sandbox is ongoing, but is there any way we can sort of make sure that that scalability effect is implemented inside of a sandbox?
Well, I think one of the areas in which many of us who have fought for consumer protections are interested in
The gentleman's time is, so we'll ask you to write that for the record, cognizant
No problem.
of the time. The gentleman yields, and the gentleman from Michigan